Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has taught us that national solutions to global problems do not work. We come to Glasgow with global ambition to save our people and to save our planet, but we now find three gaps. On mitigation, climate pledges or NDCs, without more, we will leave the world on a pathway to 2.7 degrees, and with more, we are still likely to get to 2 degrees. These commitments, made by some, are based on technologies yet to be developed, and this is at best reckless and at worst dangerous. On finance, we are $20 billion short of the $100 billion, and this commitment, even then, might only be met in 2023. On adaptation finance remains only at 25%, not the 50-50 split that was promised nor needed given the warming that is already taking place on this earth. Climate finance to frontline small island developing states declined by 25% in 2019. Failure to provide the critical finance and that of loss and damage is measured, my friends, in lives and livelihoods in our communities. This is immoral and it is unjust. If Glasgow is to deliver on the promises of Paris, it must close these three gaps. So I ask to you, what must we say to our people living on the front line in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Latin America, in the Pacific, when both ambition and regrettably some of the needed faces at Glasgow are not present? What excuse should we give for the failure? In the words of that Caribbean icon, Eddie Grant, will they mourn us on the front line? When will we, as world leaders across the world, address the pressing issues that are truly causing our people angst and worry, whether it is climate or whether it is vaccines? Simply put, when will leaders lead? Our people are watching, and our people are taking note. And are we really going to leave Scotland without the resolve and the ambition that is sorely needed to save lives and to save our planet? How many more voices and how many more pictures of people must we see on these screens without being able to move? Or are we so blinded and hardened that we can no longer appreciate the cries of humanity? I have been saying to Barbadians for many years that many hands make light work. Today, we need the correct mix of voices, ambition, and action. Do some leaders in this world believe that they can survive and thrive on their own? Have they not learned from the pandemic? Can there be peace and prosperity if 1/3 of the world literally prospers and the other 2/3 of the world live under siege and face calamitous threats to our well-being? What the world needs now, my friends, is that which is within the ambit of less than 200 persons who are willing and prepared to lead. Leaders must not fail those who elect them to lead. And I say to you, there is a sword that can cut down this Gordian knot, and it has been wielded before. The central banks of the wealthiest countries engaged in $25 trillion of quantitative easing in the last 13 years. 25 trillion. Of that, 9 trillion was in the last 18 months to fight the pandemic. Had we used that 25 trillion to purchase bonds, to finance the energy transition, or the transition of how we eat, or how we move ourselves in transport, we would now today be reaching that 1.5 degrees limit that is so vital to us. I say to you today in Glasgow that an annual increase in the SDRs of $500 billion a year for 20 years, put in a trust to finance the transition is the real gap, Secretary General, that we need to close, not the 50 billion being proposed for adaptation. And if 500 billion sounds big to you, guess what? It is just 2% of the 25 trillion. This is the sword we need to wield. Our excitement 1 hour into this event is far less than it was 6 months ago leading up to this event. Can we, with those voices and these speeches from Sir David and others, find it within ourselves to get the resolve to bring Glasgow back on track? Or do we leave today believing that it was a failure before it starts? Our world, my friends, stands at a fork in the road, one no less significant than when the United Nations was formed in 1945. But then, the majority of our countries here did not exist. We exist now. The difference is we want to exist 100 years from now. And if our existence is to mean anything, then we must act in the interests of all of our people who are dependent on us. And if we don't, we will allow the path of greed and selfishness to sow the seeds of our common destruction. The leaders of today, not 2030, not 2050, must make this choice. It is in our hands. And our people and our planet need it more than ever. We can work with who is ready to go, because the train is ready to leave. And those who are not yet ready, we need to continue to ring circle and to remind them that their people, not our people, but their citizens, need them to get on board as soon as possible. Code red to the G7 countries. Code red to the G20. Earth to COP, that's what it said. Earth to COP. For those who have eyes to see, for those who have ears to listen, and for those who have a heart to feel, 1.5 is what we need to survive. 2 degrees, yes, SG, is a death sentence for the people of Antigua and Barbuda, for the people of the Maldives, for the people of Dominica and Fiji, for the people of Kenya and Mozambique, and yes, for the people of Samoa and Barbados. We do not want that dreaded death sentence. And we've come here today to say, try harder, because our people, the climate army, the world, the planet, needs our actions now, not next year, not in the next decade. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our CYEN Climate Justice Awareness Week. We are kicking it off the day after World Environment Day with a discussion of natural climate solutions and environmental, social, and racial justice. So, this is our first day of a 3-day event, a 3-day virtual, and we will be talking with some regional and local environmental organizations to get all your burning questions about climate justice. So this is a great opportunity for you to come up with your questions. I'm telling you from now, so that you know to ask your questions when the Q&A segment reaches. By the way, we have a Q&A chat, so you can ask your questions in there instead of the general chat so we can see them. But Before I go any further, my name is Michaela Hussein, and I am the Deputy National Coordinator for the Caribbean Youth Environment Network in Trinidad and Tobago. And if you've never heard of us before, we are a non-governmental organization that is working to promote environmental issues among youth and their involvement in environmental issues. And the Trinidad and Tobago chapter is just one of the many across the Caribbean. In fact, we have over 800 regional members in 20 Caribbean countries in the wider Caribbean area. So that is a little bit about us, who's hosting. And without further ado, I will get right into the program. So, and I'm the first person on the agenda to speak. So I just wanted to talk to you all a little bit about what climate justice is and why we have a whole week on it. So climate justice means many things to many people, but at its core, it's the recognition that those who are disproportionately impacted by climate change tend to be not most responsible for causing it. And climate change is not only an environmental problem, it interacts with social systems, privileges, and embedded injustices, and affects people of different class, race, gender, geography, and generations unequally. The climate solutions proposed by climate justice advocate aims to address long-standing systemic injustices. And we may have seen that in the past years, the 2 years that we've been in the pandemic, people have been disproportionately affected. We saw the Black Lives Matter movement. People of different races are affected by the climate crisis in different ways because of how our social structure works and which groups in society it privileges more than others. So that's why we need to talk about climate justice. It's not just an environmental issue, as you may learn in school, the science of it, it's also a social and human rights issue. And we'll also be talking about how natural climate solutions intersect with that today. So you hear a lot about nature-based solutions and natural climate solutions, but what exactly are they? Well, they're strategies that support or enhance the ability of natural systems to store carbon and mitigate emissions. So that can include things like conservation, restoration. So like forests, we don't want to cut them down, restoring our degraded forests, and improving land management actions. Natural climate solutions generate core benefits like biodiversity conservation and enhancement, freshwater regulation, and social and economic support to rural and indigenous communities. So it's not that natural climate solutions are just beneficial for the environment, but also for people. So that's what we try to do. We try to achieve sustainable development with these things. So some of these organizations here have participated in such projects about natural climate solutions and climate justice to help affected communities. And that's what they're here to talk about today. So before I get into our first organization that will be speaking, which is the Breadfruit Collective, I wanted to mention that we will be asking some questions today, 3 very special questions. I know you guys probably get in the background, they don't show, but 3 very special questions. And the people who answer those will be getting prizes. So please stay tuned and stay for the question and answer segments. We have 2. So yeah, just to note that. So our first speaker will be Christine Samaru of the Breadfruit Collective. So let me tell you a little bit about Christine before I get into letting this. Christine was born and raised in Guyana. She moved to New York City in 2008. During that time, she studied at Iona College and the New School. Christine focused her studies on climate justice and sustainability in Guyana and the Caribbean. She has a master's degree in environmental policy and sustainability management. In New York, she worked as an educator at the Climate Museum and the Green Girls program under City Parks Foundation. In 2018, Christine decided to move back to Guyana to follow her dreams of doing environmental work in her country. She worked as a senior environmental officer at the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, and she is both a climate reality project and Green Faith Youth Fellow. Christine co-authored a children's book on climate change and health called The Sprouts and the Mystery of the Flood. Christine is a mentor under the Care Jamaica Young Women's Climate Change Program 2022. She is one of the coordinators of the Guyana Gender Hub and a member of the Civil Society National Reference Group under the Spotlight Initiative. Christine describes the mission behind the Breadfruit Collective as being work that is related to her history, passion, and a way to honor her late grandmother and women in her family who experienced various forms of gender-based violence. So now I'll take you on to our esteemed first panelist, Christine. Take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Christine, and I'm joining you from a rainy Guyana. We're talking about climate change. We have been experiencing, this is our rainy season, but we've been experiencing some severe flooding, and a lot of schools and so forth are actually closed today. So I actually really like interactive and informal conversations. So definitely feel free to ask questions throughout. I'm going to ask Michaela if you can please pull up the presentation. Yes, so as I was saying, I really like interactive conversation because I believe that as Caribbean people, we actually already have solutions to the climate change problem that we face. So I really believe, and I think this comes from being an educator, I really believe in having conversations and learning from each other. And I know that there's 3 questions. I just submitted 2 of my questions. They're very easy. So I hope you're able to take it out from the presentation very easy. So thank you so much. So I am the founder of the Breadfruit Collective, which is a gender and environmental justice organization based right here in Guyana. And it's work that I relate to very personally because growing up, my family and the women specifically in my family face various forms of gender-based violence. And then for me, I really got drawn to the conversation on justice growing up. So I became very interested in climate change because I understood that when it comes to gender, climate is actually very significant and very important to that conversation. So I really, the work that I do, I usually say it's not really about me only, but it's about my family and telling their story. We really believe that women are sacred custodians of the earth. And it's really important that when we talk about these issues, that we include women, we include climate change in the conversation on justice. You can find us on Instagram, and there's also our website at the Breadfruit Collective. Next slide, please. So when we talk about climate justice, for me, climate justice is justice. It's broadly justice. And when we talk about justice, we have to talk about racial justice, housing justice, migrant justice, economic justice, and LGBTQIA+ justice. These are all conversations that we need to have when we're talking about climate justice. I'm not sure if they're able to see the slide because I'm only seeing the first one.
Savannah, are you able to put it in slideshare mode?
Yeah, I'm trying to, but it's not responding for that for some reason. So what I'll try to do is expand it. Because when I try to put it in slideshare mode, it's just not responding.
Okay.
Should I continue? It's
Yeah.
on the second.
Yeah, second. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So yes, like I was saying, when we talk about climate justice, we have to talk about all these other forms of justice: racial, housing, migrant, gender, economic, and LGBTQIA plus justice. And for me specifically, my work center around gender justice and talking about the unique disadvantages that women and girls face when it comes to climate change. So in Guyana, unfortunately, we are ranked very high when it comes to domestic violence and intimate partner violence. Globally, 1 in every 3 women experience some form of gender-based violence. But in Guyana, that number is actually 1 in every 2 women. And the gender index actually ranked Guyana at 122 out of 154 countries. So there is definitely a problem when it comes to gender-based violence in Guyana. And we see this playing out actually every month. Every month, a woman or a young person gets killed by their intimate partner violence. And what I understand is we have a number of legislation that addresses these issues. However, when it comes to enforcement and education, we're still lacking in those things. So I really truly believe that climate change is a feminist issue because women make up the majority of the world's poor. Women are responsible for agricultural work and food production. Because of this, it increases their personal and economic vulnerabilities to lost harvest, which results in change in temperature, floods, and drought. So I came into this conversation noting that right now in Guyana, we have massive flooding. So I often think about those women that, and the produce and the work that they put into their harvest and what is being lost when we have these large scale flooding events. Women often have less access to resources, less access to land, they are likely to be the last to leave when natural disaster occurs. And one of the things I learned recently was a lot of times women and girls, we don't learn how to climb, how to swim. And unfortunately, when disaster happens, those are all survival skills that we actually need. Often women are primarily responsible for their families and communities. And when resources become scarce, the burden of this, usually unpaid care work, increases. And we see this clearly during the COVID pandemic when it was at its peak. A lot of children were out of schools, people were at home. And because of this, women had to take on that responsibility of being a teacher while also balancing their own work and having to work away from the office. So the shadow pandemic, this is something that happened while the COVID pandemic was happening. The shadow pandemic, it rapidly grew during the COVID-19 crisis. And what we saw, especially in Guyana and in the Caribbean, actually there was an increase in calls reporting domestic violence, gender-based violence, because again, people were in spaces with their abuser. And so during the COVID pandemic, there was also another pandemic that was happening and that wasn't really being reported on, called the shadow pandemic. So small countries like Guyana and others in the Caribbean were struggling with resources to adequately address violence against women and girls prior to the pandemic. And now with the pandemic, we have these other issues that we're trying to grapple with. Next slide. So out of 225 COVID-19 task force across 137 countries, women make up only 24% of the task force members. 67% of climate-related decision-making usually these are held by men. What we know with climate change, although as I mentioned before, women and girls are specifically really important, they're very vulnerable groups that should be involved in the crisis, what we know is young women are actually leading the climate action and leading the movement. However, they are usually not recognized and they're not in the rooms where decision and leadership, decision making are being made. So with the Breadfruit Collective, when we look at the work that we're doing, one of the things that is very important, and as I mentioned before, the aspect of justice. When we talk about justice, we really have to talk about intersectionality. And I hope out of anything you take from my presentation today is this understanding of intersectionality and understand why it's really important. So intersectionality is a framework for conceptualizing a person, group of people, or social problem as affected by a number of discrimination and disadvantages. It takes into account people's overlapping identities and lived experience in order to understand the complexity of the prejudice they face. For example, race, class, gender, identity, sexual orientation, religion, and other identity markers. This word was first used by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. So basically what intersectionality is saying is we don't live single issues life. So what may affect me, they might be the same issue, but I may be affected differently. And all these aspects of my identity, of my race, of my class, my gender identity, all these things come into play in how I may be affected by a situation. So as I mentioned before, this is a little graphic. So race, ethnicity, gender, class, your language, your body size, these are all issues that we have to take into consideration when we think about intersectionality and when we think about solutions to climate change. So when we design programs and projects, we really have to think about how these programs and projects will affect various people. Okay, so I'm coming down to the very end of my presentation. I outline why climate change is a feminist issue, and I outline why it's so important to understand and include women and girls. However, while linkages between gender-based violence and environmental issues are complex and multi-layered, these threats to human rights and healthy ecosystems are clear. Research findings demonstrate that ending gender-based violence, promoting gender equity and equality, and protecting the environment can positively contribute to a safe, sustainable, and equitable future. So basically, although when we talk about climate change, it's definitely a problem that affects us, but we're not affected by it equally. However, if we understand the importance and we implement gender equity and use these things as tools, we can actually achieve a safe, sustainable, and equitable future. I provided some resources here. So I actually worked with another youth group here in Guyana, and we created a storybook, and it's free and accessible online if you're interested in storytelling. It's called The Sprouts and the Mystery of the Flood. I also put the Climate Conscious podcast, which is a Caribbean-based podcast that hosts stories from the Caribbean. So she has a number of Caribbean speakers on various topics. And I really admire the work they're doing. And so I encourage you to check out the podcast. I know I love podcasts. There's also All We Can Save. It's another incredible podcast, another way to learn and get information about the issue. And there's also a number of various publications that I added here. So I'm gonna ask my friends from CYEN to share it with you. So with that comes the end. As I mentioned before, we are on Instagram at the Breadfruit Collective, and you can also send an email at thebreadfruitcollective@gmail.com. Thank you so much. I hope that you find the information helpful, and I would love to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that lovely presentation. I learned a lot. did you know that there was so many the gender and groups you belong to in society and climate change? I don't think I did. So thank you so much. And I have, well, if you want to ask the organization questions for the prizes, and you can do that. And then I have a question to ask. But if we're gonna hold it to the end, I can do that too. But yes.
Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to learning as well.
Yes. So, okay, maybe we can ask the questions at the end for the Bradford Collective, unless you have them, Maya. But if we can move on, then
Maybe we can save all the questions to the Q&A at the end and go ahead with the next
okay,
speaker.
no problem. I'll write down my question. Yes, but our next presenter will be Ranissa Mathura of I Am Movement. So let me tell you a little bit about her. Ranissa Mathura holds a BSc in Geology from the University of West Indies, Mona, Jamaica. She has experience in seismology and geophysics, which was augmented by her career experience at the UWI Seismic Center attached to the geophysics team. Subsequent to this, she entered the teaching career where she taught geography, social studies, and English A at St. Michael's. Ms. Matura continued into tertiary education, management, and curriculum development for awarding bodies in the United Kingdom for a number of years and is now the project manager attached to the Advancing Climate Democracy in Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago project within I Am Movement. Ms. Mathura will be assisted by Dr. Nikita Ali in their presentation for I Am Movement. Dr. Nikita Ali is a veterinarian with experience in fields such as geography, environmental management, conservation, and wildlife. She currently works at the Cropper Foundation as the Biodiversity Program Assistant and has a postgraduate degree in tropical biodiversity. The Cropper Foundation is a local non-governmental organization which focuses on issues of sustainable development, the environment, civil society, social justice, and more. They are an implementing partner with the I Am Movement on the Climate Democracy Project, and Nikita assists with the policy development aspects of that project. So clearly we have some very specialist people, experts in their fields here to speak about our topic of natural climate solutions and their intersections with social and racial justice today. So I welcome you both to the floor.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. So let me proceed to share screen. All right, so I'm just confirming that everyone can see the full slide.
Yes.
Yes, we
Great.
can.
So welcome to I Am Movement. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Michaela, for that very warm introduction. So my name is Ranissa Matura, and I am the project manager on one of I Am Movement's project, Advancing Climate Democracy in Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. So it's actually very nice of me to know that there's another panelist that's with us tonight, also from Guyana. So I'm looking forward to our subsequent panel after these presentations. So before I get into the work that we do at I Am Movement and how this work really relates to climate justice and the whole concept of what climate justice is, let me use a couple minutes of my presentation time to give you some information on who I Am Movement is and what it is we do as a company and a green NGO. So I Am Movement is a nonprofit organization which was founded in 2014 by a group of people who were very passionate about the need to effect positive environmental and social change. In order to achieve these efforts, I Am Movement has really focused its work through two main avenues. The first being climate mitigation. Now, this directly correlates to transitioning to sustainable energy approaches through energy efficiency and renewable energy to reduce our local natural gas consumption, which would then reduce our local carbon footprint. And just as importantly, to allow for these natural resources to instead be used to generate greater economic opportunities for Trinidad and Tobago. And the second avenue is climate adaptation, which really deals with building community climate resilience and supporting climate smart livelihoods through the introduction and use of what we have major projects centered around, which is known as vetiver grass, which I'm going to explain in subsequent slides, really as a cost-effective bioengineering tool, which is used to solve a wide range of soil and water-related challenges, including slope stabilization, erosion control, soil and water conservation, and for the production of carbon neutral handicrafts. So you would see on this slide that I have a graphic with a simple timeline. On that timeline, or next to it rather, you would see a table. So I Am Movement was established in 2014. So I will quickly run through some of our milestones as a company since our inception. So between 2014 to 2015, our first flagship activity was the hosting of TT's first People Climate March. You'll see the graphic to the bottom where we have that aggregation of people into a heart shape. That was our first flagship activity. Later on in 2016, we actually produced the short film titled Small Change, while simultaneously initiated the project that was centered around that vetiver grass that I just mentioned, which is known as the Vetiver Education and Empowerment Program, or the VEEP program. And that was actually part of a larger program known as the Miwi Green program. In 2017, we began the national rollout of climate talks. Our first climate talk was actually done in collaboration with the High Commission of Canada and the German Embassy. Later on in 2018, we partnered with NGC, which is the National Gas Company here in Trinidad, as well as the Energy Chamber and other key partners to produce the Rethinking Energy video series. And in 2021, we received funding from the United Nations Democracy Fund for a project titled Advancing Climate Democracy in Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. So what is climate justice? So in order to link the work that I Am Movement does with the concept of climate justice, we really need to understand the concept itself. So Michaela did a really excellent introduction on what climate justice is. So just building on that, it really is that movement that highlights the fact that climate change can have a very, very serious social, economic, and public health issues. But more than that, it's also linked to the sharing of the benefits and then the burdens of climate stabilization and concerns for climate change, because like they said, it's actually resulting in a lot of inequitable distribution of climate effects and climate risks. So it's not just felt by one demographic or one group of people, it's felt by us all. However, we do not all have the same privilege based on where we're living, based on our socioeconomic status. So persons and different demographics really feel the effect of climate justice much differently than others. So therefore, to be very comprehensive and to address this concept, this movement that is climate justice, we really need to address marginalized groups and marginalized individuals. So I'll also be sharing a bit on how our projects target these communities as well. So the first project that I would have mentioned dealt with that vetiver grass. So it's actually known as the Miwi Green program, and it is supported by the Green Fund. Now, this program really focuses on the usage and knowledge sharing about vetiver grass. This particular project received several awards and recognitions, including being the first runner-up for the 27 Resource Award from the Swiss Re Foundation and the 2018 Social Impact Project of the Year Award from the Energy Chamber. And again, in 2018, it received the Regional Commonwealth Youth Award for Excellence in Development in the Caribbean and Americas. So how does this really relate to climate justice? that directly lies in its ability to share knowledge. So a large part of this program is developed around knowledge sharing and the ability to provide outreach to marginalized communities. So that particular knowledge sharing and the fact that it is in itself a green infrastructure tool, it really speaks to climate justice in that the widespread knowledge and sharing of education around these climate issues and these climate tools can really promote green practices, which, if promoted and shared properly for significant uptake, can make huge strides towards having a cascading effect on livelihoods that are affected by climate change, either through environmental effects or through socioeconomic effects. So I would have mentioned previously about this vetiver grass. So what is it? If you look at the graphic to the left-hand side of the screen, you would see a graphical representation of what the vetiver grass looks like. So you'll also notice that the root system is almost twice as large as the surface area of the plant to the top of the soil or above soil. So it's actually labeled as 3 meters, but actually extends up to 10 feet deep. What this is able to do, because of the deep penetration through the vetiver system, it is actually taught to individuals who live in areas prone to slope instability to plant it in a specific hedgerow formation, which is known as the vetiver system. As part of the project, 8 communities were selected across Trinidad and Tobago, marginalized communities that were especially susceptible to slope instability and soil erosion issues, where the vetiver system was introduced as a green infrastructure tool that can be significantly beneficial to these communities in the reduction of this soil instability and land slippage issue. But more than that, it can actually be used to create carbon neutral handicrafts. So another part of that Maybe Green program dealt with the training of marginalized groups and communities where individuals were able to apply to do workshops that taught them how to harvest and use the grass to create soaps, to create baskets, basket weaving, and all of these were actually labeled as carbon neutral handicrafts because they were actually produced directly from the vetiver grass, no processing necessary. And as a bonus, it is also a certified non-invasive plant by the USDA. So it will never overtake your garden, overtake your communities. Where it's planted, it will stay directly there, which makes it an extremely useful tool in controlling slope instability in a garden environment or in a backyard environment. The second project that I would like to share a little bit on is our Advancing Climate Democracy in Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago project. Now, this particular project is funded by the United Nations Democracy Fund. And as its name suggests, democracy is actually tied in very heavily with that whole concept of climate justice, because a lot of the core rules and the core tenets of climate justice is actually built into the United Nations Democracy Project. Now, what is climate democracy? Under this project, it really deals with the ability of people, structures, governance, and ecosystems to come together to withstand the impacts of climate change, while at the same time taking actions to change the future course. But through this program, the main objective is to engage and influence the wider citizenry on climate issues, and that would include the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Suriname, as well as related climate policies in those countries. Through a wide variety of outreach initiatives, including social connectedness and general engagement, 2 driving factors of this project aligns directly with that tenet of climate justice through the democratic approach to information sharing and public feedback mechanisms on both our application platform as well as the development of policy brief. So while I am on that topic of application platforms, you'll see the fading of the app. And to the top of the screen, you'd see a logo called the We Climate. As part of this project, we are actually introducing the We Climate app to the wider public. And this app is really a localized initiative, which is part of a connective platform, which will allow users to have a hub one as part of the learning library of the app, to have access to all of these green infrastructure tools, to have the ability to share knowledge and to have access to knowledge on green initiatives, toolkits, whether it's disaster preparedness toolkits, toolkits on climate initiatives, toolkits on green infrastructure tools. It will actually host a lot of information from the MIWI Green program, as well as other green initiatives throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And as later versions of the app become available, also expand to include information on policy in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as from Guyana and Suriname. As part of this project, we are conducting climate talks throughout Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Suriname. Our implementing partners in Guyana and Suriname will conduct the climate talks there. And in Trinidad, Movement is responsible for conducting the climate talks locally. This is an example of what a climate talk usually looks like. So it's a very open floor, interactive discussion with students and organizations, members of the public, in a very, very interactive setting. And to date, Movement has actually conducted over 100 climate talks across Trinidad and Tobago. So I will now pass the mic to my colleague, Dr. Nikita Ali, to share a little bit more on the policy development aspect of the project. Dr. Ali, over to you.
Thank you, Renessa. Good night, everyone. So let's talk about policy. The policy development activities for the project aim to influence or develop at least 2 pieces of policy or law, that is 2 within Trinidad and Tobago, and additionally 1 each for Suriname and Guyana. Public policy within the scope of this project refers to basically any broad action, law, regulation, guideline, etc., adopted by the government which affects the country and its citizens. Our approach will be to utilize various channels, including enlisting parliamentary support, where we will focus on energy and climate change for 1 piece of policy, and the other will be based on stakeholder inputs, using a gap analysis of existing policies to determine the best approach. Next slide, please, Vanessa. Stakeholders were enlisted from various backgrounds, such as civil society, private and public sector, academia, and individual climate change experts. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, civil society involves groups such as non-governmental organizations, not-for-profit organizations, faith-based groups, and community-based groups. We believe that involving many different persons from diverse parts of society will have positive benefits, such as increased transparency, and importantly, give a voice to those throughout the country who may not usually have access to these types of activities. As mentioned before, the stakeholder group will be asked to advise and comment on targeted activities focused on policy and legislative change, particularly within the energy sector as it relates to climate change. Their unique perspectives and valued inputs will be very useful on deciding on which areas we want to focus on. The outcomes of the discussions will be available for wider public viewing via the app that Renessa mentioned and different forms of media. As the first panelist from Guyana said, remember that climate change affects everyone, the planet, people, animals, plants, all of us. So it is important that we all have a voice in the policies and laws surrounding climate change. Thank you for your attention, and I'll now return you to Renessa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali, and thank you all for listening. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present and to be part of this very, very important forum to share information about climate consciousness, build upon the concept of climate justice, and hopefully engender change among our national citizenry to do the same. I now hand over to the moderator. Michaela, over to you.
Thank you for that lovely presentation. We got a lot of insight into it was really enjoyable and the presentation design, by the way. Have any more questions? We will be saving them for the end of presentations. So, if you have a burning question, I'm very sorry, but you gotta keep that till the end. But the good news is that we only have one presenter again, and that will be Khadija Pear from the Funds Amand Community Reforestation Project. You may have heard of the FACRP before, and you may have not, but I'm going to tell you about them anyway. So, FACRP, or the Funds Amand Community Reforestation Project, is a community-based non-governmental organization which began in 1982 when the late Jaramogi and his wife Akila Jaramogi commenced work to protect the environment against man-made threats of forest fires. This organization began as a movement to community members working. This organization began as a movement of community members working together to eradicate the annual threat of forest fires within the Fund Amand watershed. As the organization grew and evolved, the FACRP team addressed more environmental challenges facing their community and across Trinidad and Tobago. To date, some activities being undertaken include reforestation, fire prevention, forest fire suppression, organic seedling propagation, implementation of surface water management systems, national environmental education and awareness programs, climate change adaptation and resilience research, facilitating regional and international student exchange programs, and implementing ecosystem services as FACRP works towards becoming a sustainable non-governmental organization and social enterprise. So Khadija is our representative from the FACRP. So take it away. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much to wonderful moderator, and it's a privilege to just be here and be present. I apologize for my camera. It's currently not in commission, but I hope what I have to say nonetheless is more incentive for the young persons present today. I am coming from the FACRP, as mentioned, is the Funds Amand Community Reforestation Project. I am Khadija P, and I'm a volunteer working with the organization along with the University of West Indies Institute for Gender Development Studies. And I'm here to speak towards the Funds Amand's advocacy around policy, intervention, and change when it comes to environmental justice. As mentioned before in the prior speakers, it's important for us to understand that when it comes to environmental justice, it has to come from different levels within society. Of course, there is the individual, like yourself, the little things that you do every day by not using too much of plastics, by conserving energy, by ensuring you lessen your carbon footprint. But also as well, you're looking at the interpersonal, which is your interaction with your friends, what you can do to influence your friends to make better choices in order to preserve the environment and to have good practices. You're looking at it from the community as well as the society. And when it comes to Funds Amand, we're looking at it now at this point from the top down, whereas the policy is very important. We've realized in terms of forest fires and intervention and prevention that there is a need for proper legislation and policy to help persons within Trinidad and Tobago specifically to adhere to better practices that would encourage us to preserve our forests. As you know, the forest gives so much back to us in terms of fresh air. It creates the trees in which it helps to bind the earth, as well as we're in the wet season, as we know, or the rainy season. And those trees within the forest also do help in terms of flooding and also in terms of landslides. In retrospect, you look at it as something very simple. You don't see the importance of preserving the forest and what it does for us, but it does so much and many more that we can't even think about. In terms of the policy, you're looking at advocacy from a standpoint of not only just reaching the government, but also outreach and education, which is always important. When you bring education to young persons like yourself, especially, making and ensuring that you're groomed in a way that helps you to understand how important it is to preserve the environment, how important it is for climate justice, and ensuring that we inherit not only this generation, but future generations inherit a very better, healthier earth, is where we start to begin to really rework the mistakes of the past. And I think it's important for us to also acknowledge that even when we feel as though as advocates for environmental justice, if we don't reach at the policy level, the little droplets that we do along the way does fill the bucket and make for change. So in terms of forest fires, I would just like to say that we need to start having more conversations as to the ramifications of how forest fires can be to the environment, not just for the burning of the trees, but the long-term ramifications for the communities within those areas and also for the entire country itself. And most times we also, I don't know if you know this, but most times we always think that forest fires, happen on their own. I don't know if you've heard that before, where they say, oh, well, these things just happen in a vacuum. But most times it really doesn't happen. Most of forest fires happen due to human activity. So in closing, I would just like to say that in terms of the Fonsaman's activities and its advocacy, and through Akila and Sasha mentioned to Kemba, there's a lot of work that is in place at right now at this moment in terms of making sure that we do put forward a policy that is comprehensive, that is attainable to all citizens to understand that we need to really change the way in which we interact with the forest. Thank you.
Thank you for that lovely speech, Khadija. We did not miss the presentation, so don't worry too much about that. But yes, I am very interested in the work of FACRP, and we know that forest fires contribute to climate change not only because the fire emits carbon, but also we're cutting down trees. So it is definitely a major issue that we need to deal with. And as you said, a lot of them are not started naturally. So definitely affects climate change and affects different communities. So now that our three organizations have presented, I will take y'all on over to the question and answer segment. So Maya, can you take it away with some of our prize questions? We're gonna get those out of the way first.
Sure. I hope the viewers are listening because these questions are going for prizes. So the first question, it relates to the presentation by the Breadfruit Collective. So the question is, why is climate change a feminist issue? List one reason. So our moderators are checking the chat. So the first person to list a correct reason will get a prize. So moderators, let me know if you see. Okay, we have women are responsible for agriculture, work. Anyone else? Any answers in the YouTube stream?
No answers in the YouTube stream.
All right. Well, women are responsible for agriculture. Christine, how does that answer look?
So it's partly correct. So I want to thank everybody for listening to my presentation, and they're definitely correct. A large majority of our population, women, are responsible for the agricultural work, and therefore when we have events like flooding and drought, it definitely have a significant impact on their produce and their livelihood. So I do think that answer is correct. I think they were definitely on the right track. Agriculture is such an important means of survival when it comes to our economy and our means of livelihood. So definitely, it is. It definitely answers the question.
Okay then, well, I would say then that Miss Singh won our prize for that question. Okay, congratulations. Okay, moving on. So the second question from the Breadfruit Collective presentation is, why is intersectionality important to the climate conversation? Why is intersectionality important to the climate conversation? I guess you might have had to be listening very closely. Let's see if anyone can take an attempt.
I'll give them a hint. Just remember the image that I showed. The two, there was a little a graph, and there was not a graph. It was like a circle, and it was showing various things.
Excuse me, can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. So the question is, why is intersectionality important to the climate conversation?
I see we have an answer in the chat from Esther. She says that it shows us that social identities work on multiple levels, resulting in unique experiences, opportunities, and barriers for each person.
Yeah, that is perfect. Yes, so definitely our identities, our race, the language we speak, we all have these various things that we carry, and definitely when we speak about climate change and the impacts we relate to it very differently. And therefore, when we're making solutions and we're crafting these solutions to climate issues, we have to understand these various intersections.
Okay, great. So then that person won then.
Yeah, Esther.
Okay,
Congratulations.
Okay, so moving on to our question from the I Am Movement presentation. So the question is, what are the 3 uses of the vetiver grass as mentioned in the presentation? This is an easy one. Even one use?
I see one use in the chat from Chelsea. She says stabilize slopes, but I think we should let's give it 1 more minute and see if she can come up with 2 more, or if anyone else can give us 3.
Chelsea, can you remember 2 more uses?
Hi, Maya.
Yeah.
So we have an answer in the Instagram chat. They said soil stabilization, water conservation, and craft.
Our friends at I Am Movement, how is that answer looking?
That is perfectly acceptable. So I think you'll have a winner there. Yes, she's correct.
Congratulations
So
to our Instagram viewer. So Priya, just take a note of their name. Thank you so much. Okay, guys, so those are our 3 questions. So any questions after this will not be, you will not get a prize from answering them correctly. But do the viewers have any questions for our presenters?
Oh, actually, Samaya, I believe we have one more question from our last presenter.
Oh, let me see. Rihanna, you can go ahead and ask that question. I think I'm not seeing that one.
Okay, sure. So from our final presentation, which was from Ms. Khadija, the question is, can forest fires be solely classified as natural disasters? Anyone? Let me repeat it 1 more time. Can forest fires be solely classified as natural disasters? I see we have an answer in the chat. Chelsea's gunning again. She said, no, it cannot because it is not started naturally. Khadija, is that the answer?
That is the answer. And Thank you, Chelsea.
Lovely. Good job, Chelsea.
Okay. Thank you all. Is that all the questions?
Yes,
Or-
those are all our questions. Over to you,
Okay, from our
Michaela.
panelists. Yes, our panelists had questions for you all, and you all did a very good job. So we will contact you for more information about, you getting the prizes and stuff. So, yes. So I will go on now to our questions for the panelists. And I know we have a couple, so I know y'all have been building them up over the past hour. Y'all burning questions. So come, now is the time to ask them. But I have a burning question for Christine. So, and that surrounded the question actually that Christine asked us. So, climate change, you said climate change is a feminist issue. I would like to know, like, I think that, when we talk about feminism, we talk a lot about women. So are we, trying to say that climate change is only a women's issue? I want to hear this from Christine, because I think a lot of the times we tend to say, feminism is only about women. But my real question is, what is men's role as well in helping climate change to be a feminist issue?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you so much. So feminism for me, it means equality and understanding that we all want access to the same resources. However, because of our social norms, usually one group gets more than the other. There's more resources for one over the other. Feminism is definitely for everybody because it allows us to be more free. I think feminism also, there is a lot of these norms, these societal norms that we are supposed to fill, like men are supposed to be this way, women are supposed to be this way. But when we use a feminist lens, we actually break apart that and understand that we as a society, we don't need to be restricted to those gender norms. A lot of times when people think of feminism, they think of it as women against men or women and girls. You're censoring them alone, but it's actually against the patriarchy. And when we talk about the patriarchy, that's a system of belief that we have inherited from our ancestors, who have inherited from their ancestor, and a lot of it also came down through colonization. So when we talk about feminism, we're talking about breaking apart that patriarchy and understanding our role in society. The way it is right now, women and girls actually suffer the most when it comes to climate impacts. So if we understand the various roles that we can, the various roles that we have, we can break that apart and allow people to be a bit more freer and create these new identities, or no identities at all, just allow people to be themselves.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Pretty comprehensive. So we all have a role to play in achieving climate justice, and we all are different. We have different privileges based on what groups we belong to, as Christine talked about intersectionality, which is, different identities that we have, whether it's being of a particular gender, being from a particular location, sometimes, can put you at a disadvantage. So unfortunately, we need to overcome those things so that everyone can win as we battle climate change. So thank you for that answer. And if no one else has questions, I had a question for I Am Movement as well. So yes, I will ask my question. So I know that you all mentioned in your presentation about green infrastructure tools. What exactly is green infrastructure? Can you elaborate on that for our not so technically versed audience, including me? Thank you.
No problem at all. So when we think about infrastructure, we think about building, right? So when we think about infrastructure development, we think about anything that we can build on. So when we simultaneously think about infrastructure damages, we think about things that can potentially damage our built material, whether it is roadways, whether it's our hillsides, whether it's, I know sometimes you may be familiar with areas where we are driving on the highway and we'll see these large areas of collapse or these extremely steep slopes where we see these slope sides actually just bare, brown, no grass. All right, so that's actually when we talk about infrastructural damage, that's what we talk about. That is what we relate it to. So the vetiver system is a green infrastructure tool. So what that means is that it's green, it's natural, right? So we're going to talk about nature-based just now. So this actually falls directly in line with a nature-based solution. So it's a green infrastructure tool. All right, so it's something that is readily available in nature. It needs no processing. So therefore, it requires a lot less effort and ability to integrate into our natural ecosystems and natural environment with the least amount of fuss and the least amount of effort, while still producing a very viable benefit to persons. So that really is what this green infrastructure tool, the vetiver grass, that is really what we mean when we say green infrastructure. I hope I explained it well enough.
Yes, that's excellent. And now you can see clearly why vetiver is so important and green infrastructure. It's a natural climate solution, trees in general, but vetiver is very special. So now I'm gonna ask some general questions for everyone. Don't worry, I got a question for you too, Khadija. I won't leave you out, but I wanna go into some general questions so that we can discuss a little more on these natural climate solutions and justice for people of different groups. So firstly, I wanted to ask about something that I've always been interested in. And so I'm gonna explain it a little bit first because not everybody might know the term. So environmental components like biodiversity and all our different species and trees and plants and stuff, they're not always valued in terms of money when we are like building up houses and stuff like that. Like you just go and cut down trees, but you don't actually look at the value of money, the monetary value of these environmental components. So where do you see the role of ecosystem accounting, which is where we place a monetary value on these environmental components in nature-based solutions to climate change? And is it already something that we have locally and regionally? And after this question, I'm sorry, I forgot we have to have a break. So after this question, we will have the break. I'm sorry, it's kind of untimely break, but yes. And then we'll come back and ask more burning questions. This is just, I had this burning question for a while now. So if y'all can help me out here.
All right, so if I can, Michaela, is that okay if I give a little bit of an answer?
Yeah,
first?
sure.
Yeah.
Renessa, I'll just jump in after
Sure.
you if I have to add anything. Yeah.
No problem at all. So in terms of nature-based solutions, I think that is a concept that was pretty new to a lot of the demographic in Trinidad, especially because it was coined first by the UN. And really, nature-based solutions are generally actions that aim to protect or sustainably manage and restore any sort of natural ecosystems that can address any type of societal challenge, while providing human well-being and benefits to biodiversity. So one particular aspect of nature-based solutions that we're actually known for in Trinidad is on mangroves. So interestingly enough, mangroves can store 3 to 4-fold more carbon. So 3 to 4 times more carbon in comparison to regular terrestrial or land forests. So the way they do this is that they actually store this atmospheric carbon and they stockpile them while they're growing, so during their growth period. So it can actually range from anywhere around 50 tons to like 220 metric tons per acre of mangrove. And if we extrapolate this to a global scale, that could actually equate to almost 24 million metric tons of carbon sequestered, so stored away per year. So that is its capacity to offset carbon emissions. So if we look at the conservation of those mangroves in Trinidad, that's actually a viable natural-based solutions. And back in 2018, the then Ministry of Planning and Development actually spearheaded a project where seedling replanting was done. And this was actually in the Brickfield mudflats in Hoover in Trinidad. And there was like the replanting of 1,000 seedlings to combat the erosion of that mangrove headland. And because the Ministry of Planning back then, they mandated and they identified the necessity of preserving our mangroves because of their importance in reducing climate change impacts. So that in itself showed a really, really environmentally conscious step in that direction. However, if it's still being continued, that is something I am not really sure of if the now government has continued the initiative. So Dr. Ali, over to you.
Okay, so I'm just going to address the natural capital part of it, right? So I believe you asked how, right, so natural capital. So basically there are 5 types of capital. Now capital can be seen as resources in a sense, okay? So there's human capital, financial capital, produced, social, and natural. Now natural capital is the resources that we get from ecosystems in terms of both goods that they provide to us. Goods could be things like fruits, fish, any sort of material commodity that they provide us, as well as ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are things such as providing us with clean air, water, etc. Traditionally, it has been very difficult for the financial markets to place a monetary value on some of these things. And remember, we get a lot of these things for free, essentially, such as the air that we breathe. The forests are naturally purifying that air for us. Companies don't necessarily have to pay for it. So because we've gotten a lot of them for free or undervalued them, they aren't considered in the cost of doing business, which is why they tend to be exploited or taken advantage of in a sense, or in terms of certain goods, extracting too much pollutant, etc. So you asked, I believe, if we have any local examples. So where I work at the Cropper Foundation, we actually have an upcoming project with a regional conglomerate where they will be incorporating natural capital accounting into their business. So they will be looking at ways that their business both depend on the environment and impact the environment. And we'll be trying to give them values for those to help them make better business decisions. And we hope that this project will be a model for other businesses to try and put a little more consideration into the value of natural capital in their everyday operations. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that hit the nail on the head. And I saw Christine had her hand up, so if you want to input anything.
Sure, I definitely 100% agree with both of the speakers. Similarly, in Guyana with our mangroves, there's so many benefits. And when you think about livelihood, there's numerous benefits to having these structures. And I think in the Caribbean, we kind of underestimate the importance of clean air, clean water, having nutritious food. I think these are all benefits that we just take it for granted, but these are all things that we can't really put a price on it because they're integral to our survival. I think one of the things that we can look at, I always talk about indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge and how they value the environment, because when it comes to economics, you can look at an area and build a building and you have an economic value for that. But when it comes to our mental health and overall physical health, like these aspects of nature are so important. And I think there is, when we talk about development and green development, there is a push to now understand the impacts of mental health and the eco anxiety that young people, for example, that we're all facing.
That's also an excellent point. That's something we overlook a lot too. A lot of us may have actually been through traumatic events like hurricanes, being in the Caribbean. So, and that, I know, that's like I've never been through a hurricane before, but I know that can cause trauma. So, definitely, I'll probably ask a question about that to get more information. But I have to hold my burning questions because we have a lovely break now where you will get some informational videos and music. So please, you gotta get up, as Christine just talked about mental health and also taking a bio break to drink some water and stay hydrated. And yeah, take your eyes off the screen for a moment. So we'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Haynes. I work with Climate Analytics. It's a not-for-profit think tank with headquarters in Berlin. I have the role of senior legal advisor. My work generally involves me advising countries, usually members of the Alliance of Small Island States, in particular those who are from the Caribbean region, in climate change discussions. Climate justice, I think, is the haute courant term now, coming out of the global experience of the pandemic last year, the Black Lives Matter movement, the sort of amazing intersectional discussion that took place between those kind of social human rights movements and environmental movements, and understanding that we really need to find common cause in order to be able to address the issues that are at stake. So climate justice to me has emerged as sort of an umbrella term to sort of, encapsulate all of that discussion that is fairly new at least at the international level in the climate space. Whereas some larger developing countries were very focused on the idea of equity, which itself does raise some climate justice dimensions. From the island perspective, we raise the issue of survival, which goes more to the heart of this question of what climate justice means and what it needs to look like for those on the front lines. In terms of the current discussion, this is playing out more along the lines of a renewed sort of energy for the discussion of the intersection between climate change and human rights. And as always, more or less in the discussion around loss and damage. Some limited progress was made ahead of Paris in 2013 with the creation of the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. That mechanism now serves the Paris Agreement via decisions that were made in 2015 onwards. But now we are still having a discussion on how do we really make the work of that mechanism count on the ground within countries that are actually suffering from these previous impacts of loss and damage. How do we resource that work so that it actually delivers? The domestic layer brings us, I guess, much more closely into looking at vulnerable communities and then having to decide on who is really vulnerable, because you have, frontline communities that are on the verge of being displaced because of sea level rise. You have communities that are being battered by increasingly severe weather events. We speak into the complete unpredictability of when the dry season starts or ends, or when the rainy season starts or ends. It's now just all one big dry rainy season. So the impact that has on agriculture and those who are vulnerable because their livelihoods rely on that particular area. But then we also speaking about, I guess, communities that are on the front line because of actions governments are taking to address the climate issues. So this question of just transition, and which many see as being the heart of the climate justice discussion. But there are lots of questions around that because with so many different types of vulnerabilities and so many different communities that may be vulnerable, and human rights aspects of it as well, the role of environmental defenders and their issues as well. It would be a bit bizarre to focus the climate justice movement just on this idea of workers and transitioning of the workforce that is primarily involved in fossil fuel or fossil fuel related types of labor. I don't know if there's enough work being done conceptually to sort of weave all of these strands together into a coherent regional approach that can address the fact that we are all highly vulnerable states, but then also the fact that our governments still have a responsibility for being able to address the needs of the vulnerable within their own societies, and that takes into account that those needs sometimes will conflict.
Okay, hi everyone, welcome back after that lovely break. I hope you all took away something from Ruana Haynes. If not, that's fine, because we needed a break from the screen. So we are back to our questions, but first, before we get into the questions, I wanted to say a shout out to the Clara Lionel Foundation. CYN's work on climate justice in the Caribbean is made possible through their generous support. So shout out to them. And I also wanted to remind the panelists that this is a discussion, so you can comment on other people's answers, and we would totally appreciate if you can turn on your cameras. So now let's get right back into those burning questions. And I see, hi Christine, welcome back. I see that we don't have any questions in the Q&A yet. I don't know if we have any from YouTube, but Biani, if you can let us know if we have any from YouTube. But if not, then I got some more, because I'm coming with all these questions.
No, we don't have any from YouTube right now, so you can go right ahead.
Okay, lovely. So I would like to know now a little focus on, I have some specific questions here because I was doing a little digging up on climate justice. And I found that some research has found that people approaching nature-based solutions or natural climate solutions like planting trees and all that stuff, they focus on humans a lot when they do that research, instead of the ecological impacts and the impacts on the environment, like the bad stuff and the good stuff. It's not always focused on. So I wanted to know if you all see, where do you see the need for a focus on more vulnerable ecological components? Because we've always been talking today, we've talked a lot about more vulnerable people, but do you see a need for focus on different vulnerable components of certain ecosystems? Like, are there specific species we don't focus on as much? Do we need to look at, how rats and cockroaches are affected by climate change? Like, we don't like them that much, but, do we need to look at them more? So, yeah, if that's a question you all are interested in answering, I was curious about that. If you need time to think about it, I can also ask another one.
Can I have the question? So, could you, so in terms of ecosystems and ecological implications of the disasters that we experience and our somewhat neglect towards the environment, I think it's important, yes, in terms of the living organisms within. I could speak for in terms of forest fires. You have instances where there are species that are displaced when these fires are wild and spreading, and sometimes it leaves them in a vulnerable state in which they are unable to survive, and that displacement kind of like impacts their just the sustainability of your species itself and the carrying on of that specific species, especially those are mammals, specifically within the forest. I would say too, as well, if we're looking at even the marine effects on the marine life as well, and how that impacts us within the Caribbean, right? And we're speaking most times, yes, you're speaking towards the monetization of the natural resources that we have, right? What does that mean for the fishing industry? What does that mean for the ecotourism industry when our environment is detrimental? And yes, it affects the human beings, but then these ecosystems, we all live together within this one earth, and we coexist. and how do we now not only respect the human rights, but also just like understanding the importance of preserving our ecology and our ecosystems and not monetizing, because I sometimes I feel like we stick on the capitalist form of economy when we look at issues such as this, but more so trying to change person's perspective rather than putting this monetary value to things, but understanding its wider impact and value for our lives and our sustainability.
Thank you for that, Khadija. Christine, I see you want to interject.
Yes, I agree with what Khadija said. And to add on, persons are very familiar with the Convention on Climate Change, but there's also a whole convention on biological diversity. And what we know is climate change is actually a driver of biodiversity loss. And Khadija mentioned it before, like we're in this web of life. And yes, when we talk about justice, various persons have, you know, they need that equity, they need to rise up and claim their justice. But there's also justice when it comes to the environment, and how do we put a price on that? I think we got so used and accustomed to things just being in our reach, getting things easily, the kind of food that we consume, the fish, the meat, that kind of thing. I think we forget about the web of life that we are a part of. And so, like, when an animal or species become extinct, there is actually an effect on the ecosystem. We may, as human, we may not feel the effect, but there's definitely an effect. And when it comes to climate change, I think you mentioned it when you talk about the rodents and pests. Because of climate change and because of our environment becoming warmer, it's actually creating an environment where those pests are able to strive. So now we're bringing in organism into the ecosystem that's not part of it. And there's invasive species and all of these kinds of things that we're taking out and we're putting in, and it's like we're breaking that balance of the circle of life, so to speak.
Wow. Yes. Okay, that's scary. And if you are not convinced that climate change is a terrible issue, by today you should be, because I don't think much of us like cockroaches. Okay, well, I don't like them, right? So, yes, thank you for that comprehensive answer. So
Well,
I
I saw a comment in the YouTube, someone said, save the cockroaches. So I think we have some cockroach supporters out there.
Yes, okay, we do need that important, they're ecologically important somehow. So definitely you all are right.
And Michaela, we also have a question in the question and answer, the Q&A forum. Someone had asked, what are some of the ways us, the normal people, can help with climate justice? So any of our panelists, go right ahead.
I could jump in. So you, the normal people, us, the normal people, we have so much power and we bring so much innovation and we hold so much creativity within us. I think the story that we have, our ancestral story, is so vital to this conversation on justice. And I think when we talk about climate change, it's very, very depressing and overwhelming. But I think one of the things that helps is understanding your role. I always say that all of us are, the way we live, the things we buy, the things we consume, we're actually paying for it in some way. So I think one of the ways you can become involved in climate justice movement is attending events like this and becoming aware of the issue, one. Two, finding people in your circle or finding people within your school environment that's doing this kind of work and get in touch with them, because I think the problem is so large and overwhelming. But when you find out that other people are also interested in this type of work, it becomes easier for you to share your ideas. And I think all work, especially grassroots work, things that are happening within person's own community, I think that holds so much value. value.
Vanessa, you are free to also interject.
Thank you so much. So I really loved what Christina was just talking about and becoming involved. That's a huge part of making a giant stride towards that movement of climate justice. So while we were talking about, having justice for the environment as well, one of the other projects that wasn't mentioned previously is actually our quarry rehabilitation project that's being done in collaboration with the EMA here in Trinidad. So I Am Movement is actually has actually been undertaking that project at the national quarries in Sangre Grande in Trinidad and Tobago. So what we really have done is undergone a tree planting and crop planting initiative in the quarry to basically bring back that sort of life biodiversity to the parts of the quarry that are no longer in use. Because previously, after the quarry would have been mined, the vacant parts are usually ideally left vacant, but they have been so gracious to allow us to come in and really partner with them in making this ecologically friendly space. A couple months ago, or maybe it was 1 month ago in the Safe Soil event, we actually hosted the first day at the national quarries where we actually reintroduced a parrot back into the quarries as the first reintroduction of animal life back into that particular segment of the quarry. So if it's possible, and I can just do a quick screen share, I would like to share some photos of this initiative with our attendees. So,
oh, yes, we would love that.
Let me just do a quick screen share. So this is the national quarries here in Trinidad. And so this is the bundles of vetiver grass that we actually took to the quarry. There's an area of the quarry that's being used as a vetiver grass nursery. This was a representative from the Wildlife Conservation Society of Trinidad and Tobago who actually partnered with us in bringing the parrots to the quarry for the release that day. These are what the root bundles look like of the vetiver grass. So these are what is planted in tandem in various areas of the quarry to assist with bringing back moisture to the soil. Because if you're familiar with the quarry, it's a very, very devoid area for topsoil. So you would see here that we have 4 months versus 4 years. What we have actually done is actually reintroduce some sargassum seaweed to areas of the quarry. The seaweed would actually cover that top area, that topsoil of the quarry lands, and lock in moisture where previously there would not have been the avenue to do so. And while the seaweed dies, it will actually leave behind valuable ecological material that would be able to be reused back into that ecosystem environment. So I'm just going to share quickly a couple more photos of the replanting. So we do have quarry champions that were part of I Am Movement, and they are still very, very active in the quarry. Just like Christina said, it's all about getting involved. So I would encourage you guys, we are always, welcoming volunteers. We love to have new people on board on our initiatives. It's very fun, it's very outgoing, and of course it's very, very rewarding when we can see these massive initiatives taking place. So I would also make that information available to CYEN and you all can share it as well as if you would like to become volunteers yourself. As I said, we always welcome new persons on board. So thank you very much.
Yes, we would welcome that. And this is a great opportunity. If you're looking for somewhere to get involved in environmental work because you want to help, these people are definitely the right people to talk to, as well as us here at CYEN. So, and we're always pushing for that collaboration. So this is why we're doing things like this. So thank you for that. And I see that we have 2 questions in the Q&A. So I want to ask the first question, which is, how do you ensure that everyone has a voice to stand up for their rights in this situation about climate change, since it's a feminist issue that affects them the most?
I think the question is, can you repeat it one more time, please?
Sure. How do you ensure everyone has a voice to stand up for their rights in this situation about climate change, since it's a feminist issue that affects them the most?
Yes, so climate change is definitely a feminist issue. And when I say feminist issue, understanding that women and girls have unique challenges. I think persons, they have to understand their role in the climate movement, and allowing within the Breadfruit Collective, I think it's important to allow person that space to speak on the issues and speak on their experiences themselves. So for me, I always encourage person to speak out and, understand the issue and talk about it from their perspective. And for me, specifically, when I talk about any issue relating to gender-based violence and so forth, I always make a disclaimer that, I'm speaking from my perspective of it. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone, but I'm making, if possible, I ensure that I'm making space for other people to speak on it, because I really do really appreciate that this movement is calling for us to be diverse in our solutions. And for us to be diverse, we have to bring in various people to be able and, motivated to speak out. And a lot of times it is overwhelming, but taking on a role and being in the climate justice movement doesn't always mean you have to speak out and be the loudest person in the room. You can also write. You can also write poetry. You can also, it's a movement that's very personal. The way we shop, how we talk to our family and our friends, it all matters when it comes to the climate movement.
Thank you for that. And yes, so I want to just emphasize one of Christine's points, which is that, we don't always have to relate climate change and environmental issues only to science. But as we have been talking about, it's a human rights issue, and everyone plays a part in it, including artists and people alike, people who do, literary artists, theater, dance, all those things are a part of this, because we are connected to the environment and we are connected to its issues. So definitely a strong point. And there's another question in the Q&A from Chelsea Slater. What would you say would be our condition in future years to come if we do not find ways to adhere or deal with climate change?
Michaela, if I may, can you just repeat the question?
Sure. So it's, sorry, let me just get right. What would you say would be our condition in future years to come if we do not find ways to adhere or deal with climate change?
Very good question. So if I may take an initial answer. So was this from one of the secondary school students in our, yeah? So very, very good question. So as we know, we are headed towards a 2-degree increase in overall sea surface temperature, but generally overall temperature of the Earth's atmosphere. And that's what that video 1.5 was talking about, because what they ideally are alluding to is that 1.5-degree increase is more manageable than a 2-degree increase. So you might think the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees, it's not that much, but generally the consequences for the entire world is so much more dire when we have a 2-degree increase in general temperatures across the globe. Our sea levels, now we are a Caribbean entity. All of us, even Guyana is classified as a SID and associated with the Caribbean. All right, so even though we are an island, we are classified as a SID, a small island developing state. By nature, SIDS are small and isolated from each other. If we think about the Caribbean archipelago and our distribution as part of the Caribbean, we are very small. If you look at Trinidad compared to, let me just ballpark, Canada or the USA, we are a dot on the world map, all right? A dot who has 70% of our population living on our coastlines. So let's think about it. With higher intensity, which means everybody's been aware of the rain we've been receiving over the last week. Think about that rainfall of a longer duration, so it lasts for much longer and then more frequently. So while we would have had weeks of sun in between, now we might have had days of sun. All right, so our groundwater stores are going to become filled. So that increased rainfall is going to lead to increased flooding, which means that our coastal population is going to be increasingly at risk. And we have, and Trinidad, I can speak for at least, we have more than half of our populations populating areas that are in direct contact with that coastline. If we think about Port of Spain and our capital city, if rain falls for 15 minutes continuously of a significantly high level rainfall, we flood. All right, so when we think about the frequency and the duration of these high intensity events, it puts us at risk for increased flooding, and then with flooding comes infrastructural damage, our homes, livelihoods. What about our farmers? They're going to lose crops, which means that they're going to lose money. So, and in addition to the crops and the money, when there's an overall increase in the loss of crops, we're actually going to have a food security problem, because guess what? Trinidad isn't going to be the only country that's going to be experiencing this. It's going to be on a global scale. That is really what 2 degrees more means to us. So if we don't really get involved with making strides, no matter how small, towards becoming more green oriented and making climate smart transformational choices, that is the world that we would eventually inhabit. And that is the world our future generations are going to inhabit. So in order to see the change in generations ahead, we need to make those transformational decisions now. I hope that helps a bit.
I'm sure it does. But also that question is such a heavy question that we can have a whole other discussion on that. So definitely good to be concise with it. But also I noted that, you also pulled out impacts on people like farmers. So clearly, people of different occupations are also affected differently by climate change. And this is why, again, climate justice is so important, because farmers are directly involved with the environment. Whereas, other people might not be directly involved, but they are still impacted in different ways. So definitely a great question. I know we have another question in the chat.
Before we go on to the next question, I just want to bring some comments from our YouTube, our viewers on YouTube. So Ryan Asue says, the environment is the foundation of society and the economy. Maintaining and restoring ecological integrity helps protect vulnerable communities closely dependent on the environment. And Delini Bharat says, I agree that step 1 is awareness and being informed on climate change and its impact.
Thank you. Thank you for those lovely comments. And yes, I just want to say shout out to all our YouTube supporters. We love you. And the Zoom attendees too. Everybody who's attending this event. And yes, thank you, Maya, for those comments. So our question from another anonymous attendee: how do you think environmental and climate change issues disproportionately impact Caribbean countries with a not so great economical state? So yeah, anyone wants to go for that one?
Yeah, like we mentioned before, we are already seeing the impacts of climate change. And as Caribbean countries, a lot of us in Guyana, 90% of our population, resides on the coast. So if we bring in, when it comes to our government, if they're not in a position whereby they're making strong, and not only saying, but actually doing, they're implementing strong programs and projects that value people's life and livelihood, it's definitely completely negative, because when we think of livelihood and when we think of the future and the planning for the future, we have to bring in the conversation on climate change, because the climate change conversation we're not talking about impacts that's going to happen in the future. We're already seeing the impacts as small countries. So we definitely need our government to not only speak at the high level that they'll do certain things regarding climate change, but we actually need to see it like on the ground, and we need to see them funding and adapting and building resiliency for our livelihood and for our people.
Yes. So again, people of different economic standings affect, and countries, whole countries, are affected differently by climate change. So definitely we would need, different financial instruments too to help us overcome climate change. So I'm now getting a little prompt here that we need to wrap up by 8. So we shall take 1 or 2 more questions. And I have a question, more so geared to the panelists. And then I see we have 1 more question in the Q&A. So I know we talked about volunteering and environmental activists, right? Like yourselves and a lot of our students and persons watching this live stream here would be environmental activists, whether you belong to an environmental club at your school or a whole NGO. So I know you mentioned earlier, Christine, eco-anxiety. So what is that about, and how does it impact activists like yourselves? And what advice do you have for our students who want to become environmental activists?
Thank you so much for that question. And I can honestly say I suffer from eco-anxiety because I think our generation, we're seeing the impacts of climate change. We're also living in a time, in a pandemic. We're also, the economy within our various country, they're not stable. And so there are various social issues that affect us. And I think so the eco anxiety, I think it's an aspect of our anxiety that it's actually a very recent field of psychology that persons are still studying to understand how the things, our environment, how it actually impacts us and our well-being. For persons, I think one of the cure for feeling the way I feel sometimes about the planet and about my country, it's actually action. And I always tell persons that my organization, the Bradford Collective, was actually something that I put most of the effort into making it public actually during the pandemic. So it's actually a way to heal myself in a way, because I find with starting this movement, I'm able to connect with other persons doing similar work and also feel like I'm not alone in the movement. So any advice I would give person is just, the things that bothers you, they're very relevant and they're real, and understanding that is the first step, and finding people that align with your, the things that you're passionate with. And always, I think nature has a really important role in healing us. And I think when we think of eco anxiety, it makes sense that nature would be the medication for feeling that way. Like finding a way to take care of yourself and ensuring that some form of nature is a part of that is some of the things that I do to help overcome eco anxiety.
Thank you. Renessa, I don't know if you have anything to add. If you don't, we could go on to the next question. But I know it might impact you as well as with all the work that you've been doing.
I think Christina really elaborated perfectly on that. Was actually the first time I came across the term eco-anxiety. So for now, I don't have anything else to add, but definitely if I come across anything else that relates to that particular ideology as we move along the projects, I would definitely send you guys updates.
Okay, thank you. And we just have one last question and then we're going to wrap it up. Do you think that climate and environmental issues will improve in the future? If yes, why? If not, why not?
So if I may. So I think yes, and this may just be me being very optimistic, but when you compare the current activism works that's being undertaken across the globe now, not only by small activists in all areas of environment and climate, but by these large organizations like WMO, ILO, IMO, UN, various branches of the UN who are now actively making funding available and more funding available and promoting the access to that funding, particularly to the countries that are marginalized and the countries that need it the most, like small islands. We are actually seeing that now there are more avenues that are becoming available for persons such as owners of NGOs, private entities, to become more involved in that climate change and to become more involved in making a difference and, inspiring others to make that same difference as well. And in addition, we are actually also seeing a rise in climate consciousness. Just like this webinar tonight, the concepts of climate justice, persons becoming more aware, more educated, and not just on our small islands, but across the globe as well. And we're gradually seeing a transition towards persons who are really taking the green initiatives into their homes and into their livelihoods, and really finding ways to blend that idea of becoming green with a comfortable lifestyle. So I think within, in the near future, we will be seeing, if not a huge difference, a definite difference.
Thank you for that. And if Christine, if you don't have anything to add, I will wrap it up now.
Just to add on, I think with climate change, it allows us to have a lot of these conversation around justice. So although there's a lot of doom and gloom and the depressing, aspect of it, like we're already seeing the effects of it, I think there are also possibilities, and the possibilities and the hope is really important for us, especially as young people, because it helps us and it motivates us, to create and to be innovative. And the climate conversation, it shows us the injustices in all other systems that we have. So if we're able to fix the climate situation and we're able to do so in a just manner, it means that we're creating a society that's more equitable and that's more sustainable for all people.
Right, for sure. We can definitely learn from each other. So thank you all for your contributions. And I could stay here and ask so many more questions, but we all need to sleep. So thank you all again for coming. And I just want to emphasize that this is a conference. So even though we have to wrap up tonight, we have tomorrow and Wednesday, 2 more days packed with wonderful discussions for you all on different topics. Today, we discussed 2 pillars of climate justice, which were the natural climate solutions aspect and the environmental, social, and racial justice aspect. So tomorrow, we will be discussing climate change education and engagement, and another pillar of climate justice. So please stay tuned for that. It will be at the same time, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Please join. And I want to say thank you all for coming. Thank you for everyone who supported us, the attendees, and these lovely panelists who came out today. Your contributions are extremely valuable. And thank you again to the Clara Lionel Foundation for your generous support. And yes, that'll be it for us. Have a good night, everyone. And if you've got more questions to ask, come back and check us out tomorrow and tell your friends. Okay, bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.